In studying the Rambam on a daily basis, we come across the part where the Rambam says that character traits, personality traits that are undesirable, are as sinful as sins committed in action. People shouldn't make the mistake of thinking that a sin is only something you do. A sin can also be something you feel. Just as it is ungodly to do certain acts, it's also ungodly to feel certain feelings. Now, this is a departure from what we generally believe today, that human feelings or human needs can never be wrong. They can only be right. That's how we generally think. The Rambam comes along and says that when the Mishnah says that it's wrong to lose your temper, the Mishnah is not merely suggesting that being even-tempered might be nicer for your neighbors or make you more tolerable. The Mishnah is actually talking about right and wrong, acceptable and unacceptable. Certain emotions and certain personality traits are literally unacceptable, just as a non-kosher sandwich. Why? Because we are commanded to serve God as human beings, which means to serve God with those ingredients, those components that make us human. We're not allowed to eat certain foods, but that doesn't involve or engage our humanness. Our humanness is involved mostly in mind and heart, the traits that sets the human apart from the animal. It's there in the mind and in the heart that we are to serve God. The counting of the Omer, from the second day of Pesach until the giving of the Torah and Schmooze, each day of these 49 days represents a subdivision of one of the 7 emotions. Each emotion, we're told, is composed of all the rest, so they are 7 times 7, and those are the 49 days between Pesach and Shavuos, each day being a preparation for the receiving of the Torah. So one dimension, or 1/7 of one of the 7 emotions, is purified and elevated or fixed, so that when we come to the Torah, the receiving of the Torah, we are human beings, mention. We're prepared to receive the Torah. It wouldn't be enough to say, I'm willing to obey, tell me what to do, and I'll do it. I don't have the energy or the interest or the mind and the heart to get involved with this on some personal level. If I can't eat it, okay, I won't eat it. I won't do it. I'll do whatever it says. But that isn't enough. On the other hand, the person that says, look, I have all the right feelings and my heart's in the right place. I agree basically with all the principles of Torah, but I don't have the patience for all these little details. It's too uncomfortable not to be able to eat in the restaurant. So I'm Jewish in my heart, in attitude and feeling, and I'll protect my right to be Jewish, but I can't do all these things. Either way would be wrong. To divide that further, a person can say, it all makes sense to me in my mind, but emotionally it doesn't suit me. It doesn't fit me. It doesn't match my own feelings and personality or character. And on the other hand, there are people whose emotions and feelings are perfectly comfortable with Yiddishkeit, with everything in Torah. Torah feels right, Torah appeals to them, Torah speaks to them, addresses them emotionally. Intellectually, though, they just can't get into it. They'll do the mitzvahs, they'll enjoy it, they'll feel it, they'll be involved in it, but they don't want to hear it. Intellectually, they can't get interested. When the Baal Shem Tov came around, he found that the Jewish community of that time had split into 2 camps. One camp said, if you don't learn and don't understand and don't know, then you can't really be Jewish. You can't really be a Jew, because then your Yiddishkeit is worthless. The other camp was saying, we love Yiddishkeit, we love God, we want to serve God, we're willing to do everything He says, but we don't know, we can't learn. So you had half the population serving God with their heart, and the other half serving God with their mind. And the 2 couldn't see what they had in common. The Baal Shem Tov came to the learners, and he said to them, it's not enough to know, it's not enough to learn, you have to serve God with your heart. And then he went to the people who served God with their hearts and said, it's not enough to be sincere and willing, you've got to start learning. You may not ever become the world's greatest scholar, but you have to learn. He told the scholars, you may not get to be the greatest human specimens in the world with perfect personality traits and wonderful qualities of character, but you have to start working in that direction. Why? For the very reason God created us human. because God wants humans to serve him. Animals serve God in their way. The planets and the stars serve God in their own way, as it says in the Torah. Angels serve God in their way. Everything serves God in its way, and we have to serve God in our way. What is our way? What is the human way? It's been a philosophical debate for centuries. What exactly is the human? Some say the human is intelligence, a level of intelligence that the animals don't have. Others say that the human is character. Chassidus says that the unique thing about a human being is his intelligence, but the quality that makes a human being valuable or precious are his emotions, which means that when you take them together, the intelligence and the human emotions, that is truly human. What is truly a mensch is emotion molded by intelligence, feelings based on intelligence, cultivated emotions, purposeful emotions, a personality and character that is formed and shaped and molded intelligently by purpose and by design. Sadness, bitterness, and joy are feelings that we struggle with today probably more than ever. We suffer too much of some, and we don't have enough of the other, and as a result, we very often find ourselves stagnating, stuck, unable to proceed, tangled up in one of these three feelings. To unravel them and to figure out how they all serve in Judaism would free us to proceed and go ahead with our lives, to continue to grow and not stagnate. And Chassidus helps. Chassidus comes along and says, let's understand what emotions are, what feelings are. Chassidus says that emotions are basically love and fear. Those are the dominant human emotions, to be drawn to something or to be repelled by something. Love and fear. And that's why both the emotion of love and fear, attraction and withdrawal, are necessary in the service of God. To feel attracted to God and at the same time to feel repelled, overwhelmed by God's greatness and our own insignificance. We feel close to God at times, and that is our experience of love of God. Sometimes we feel very small and insignificant, and that's our experience of fear of God. To serve God only with love would not be sufficient, because God created us with 7 emotions, and each emotion is there so that we have another avenue along which we serve God. If the avenue remains unused, then we create a blockage, an imbalance in all of creation. Everything God created must serve its purpose. Just as in the body, in order to have good health physically, every part must participate. If, God forbid, a part of the body stops functioning, then the whole body suffers. Even though that part isn't doing anything, it's not bothering anybody, it simply quit. It doesn't want to do its thing, doesn't want to do its share in the system within the body. And why should any other part of the body suffer or mind? Yet we see that it does. The whole body suffers if the heart quits. So if we're carrying around an extra limb, God forbid, it destroys the equilibrium of the body. In the same way, when God gives us talents or feelings or personality traits and we don't engage those personality traits, we don't engage them in the service of God, if we leave these traits out, if we say, I'll serve God with my feet, my heart, but leave my mind out of it, it creates an imbalance in the whole system. So we serve God with both love and fear. Very often, we don't know enough about God to love him directly or to fear him directly. So the love and the fear are of a secondary nature. We can't honestly say that we love God, but we can honestly say that we want to be involved with God. We love being involved with God in some way. We can also honestly say that we fear losing that involvement. We don't like being estranged from Judaism. If you talk to the average Jew in the street, regardless of how little he knows about Judaism, and suggest that he may not be a Jew or may not be Jewish, he feels terribly insulted, a frightening insult, because we don't want to hear that. We don't want to lose our Yiddishkeit, which is another way of saying that we don't want to lose our connection to God. And that's fear of God. Now, some details about emotion, or further definition of emotion. emotion has to be a response to something outside of ourselves. Self-love is not an emotion. A person consumed by self-love is not suffering from an emotional problem. Self-love is a state of being. It's a condition, but it can't be called an emotion in the literal sense of the word. An emotion, by definition, means a response to something outside of yourself. Another thing about emotion is that human emotions apply properly only to other human beings. We say a person loves food, but that's really a misnomer. It's borrowing the term, borrowing a term that applies properly to a human interaction and applying it where it doesn't really belong. One doesn't love food. One can enjoy food. One can be overly indulgent in food. One can have all sorts of hang-ups with food. But love is not the way to describe that hang-up. It is not the emotion of love. And the same is true with fear. We use the word in many contexts. We're afraid of things. We're afraid of this or afraid of that. But it's not really the true emotion of fear. The real fear, that is the human emotion, applies properly to other humans. The exception, of course, is God. Although God is not human, we can love him and we can fear him. And that's because our godly soul relates to God the way a human being relates to another human being. To love an animal is a borrowed term. Fear of an animal is really also a borrowed term, because those are basically the dominant emotions that make a human being human and therefore belongs properly within the realm of the human and directed at another human being. Now, these emotions, although unique to the human being, can be corrupted or they can be elevated. When the love and fear come naturally without premeditated purpose, then even the love of God or even the love of another human being is not unique. Which means to say that if I'm naturally, or I'm just the kind of person that loves people, then the love for other people is not really appropriate for a human being. Although it's different from the love that an animal may feel, but the thing that they have in common is that the human's love of another human being, when it comes naturally, is as instinctive as the animal's love is. So that both come naturally without purpose. The animal loves what it loves and fears what it fears, not because it thought it through and came to that decision, but because that's how it was created. And we are also created with certain conditions. Some people find it very natural and very easy to love other people. And so they love other people, and that's very nice. But it's not the unique kind of love that makes a human different from the animal, because it's not premeditated. The result very often is that this kind of love is indiscriminate. Because the love was never based on any purpose or any thoughtfulness, therefore, when it comes time for the emotion to be guided and to be channeled or to be corralled to where it belongs, we'll find that that emotion refuses to cooperate. It refuses to be corralled because it was never subjected to intelligent guidance in the first place, like an undomesticated animal. If the animal feels like behaving, it'll behave. But when it feels like it doesn't want to behave, then there's no stopping it. It's an untrained animal. So the emotion, even within the human being, if it comes natural and was never subjected to control, to guidance, to purpose, it never submitted to the authority of the mind, then when it comes time when you need that authority, the emotion won't respond. It doesn't understand. And the same is true with fear. The fear that comes natural, meaning the feeling of inferiority or insignificance, a feeling of smallness as compared to others, or even compared to God, if that feeling is not a purposeful one, if it's not a premeditated one, if it's not subject to the control of the mind in its initial birth, then when it gets out of hand, and it inevitably will, and then you try to bring it back into line, you find that it won't cooperate. It's not accustomed to obeying. It's a wild growth. It doesn't respond to reason. So the true condition of a mensch is emotion of love or fear, but as they are created and guided by intelligence, premeditated emotion. It seems ironic that the people that you find you are easily able to love, they're kind, they're nice, and yet that's not where the real significance of a relationship lies. In a true mensch relationship are the people to whom you feel indifferent instinctively, and yet through intelligence, through thought, through premeditated purpose, you bring yourself to appreciate that person who by nature left you cold. An even greater accomplishment as a human being is to turn around an instinctive dislike for a person and replace it with a liking for that person. We're told that there are occasions when God challenges us with different kinds of fear, puts different things in our path that frighten us. And we go through the fear, certain that we're going to suffer certain consequences, and yet these consequences never materialize. And the challenge ends, and the fear is over, and we look back at it, we don't understand what this was. What was it all about? There was nothing but the fear. That's all it was. So why did God put us through that? And one of the explanations is so that we can use our mind to shape our fears, so that we have an opportunity to deal with the emotion and train it to respond to intelligence, so that when we will need to have the fear, we will be able to generate it. We will be able to bring it up from someplace within the heart when it is needed. And also, when it is inappropriate, we should be able to calm it and dispel it, get rid of it, and replace it with the emotion more appropriate to the situation. And that is basically human emotion. And so God gives us opportunity to practice this by presenting fear, which is not based on anything, fear for the sake of fear, just so that we have an opportunity to wrestle with it and discipline it and train it. Now, what about sadness? What about joy? If a human emotion, by definition, means a response to something outside of yourself, is sadness a response to something outside of yourself? Is joy a response to someone beside yourself? They're not. Of course, things outside yourself produce these feelings. But those feelings are not a response, they're a condition. And that's why they can't really be called emotions. We can call them feelings because you feel them, but they're not emotions. They belong more in a category of disposition or mood. And what does this mean? What is a disposition? What is a mood? You have intellect and you have emotion. But are they functioning? Is your mind alert? Is your heart responsive? Are your emotions warm, agitated when they should be? Or aren't they? That depends on a disposition. Disposition means the general mood that will either encourage the mind and heart or discourage the activities of mind and heart. When a person is sad, they're not experiencing the emotion of sadness. What is happening is that they are in a mood in which they are not disposed to any emotion. When you're sad, you can't feel emotion. Sadness is not an emotion. It is a disposition that prevents emotion. And if it gets to be really bad, then it discourages thought as well. A person very sad can't even think. So the disposition of sadness stifles both emotion and intellect. When a person is sad, what do they say? How do they behave? Basically, they don't care. Do you love? Do you hate? Do you know what you're saying? I don't care. He doesn't have the energy to do the things which are unique to the human being. So the sadness is not a human emotion, it's the absence of emotion. And joy is also not an emotion, it's the opposite disposition of sadness. If a person is happy, happiness not being an emotion in itself, because it's not a response to someone outside of yourself, it's a description of a mood that you're in, and not a description of something outside of you. And therefore, it, in and of itself, does not broaden your horizon. It doesn't extend you beyond yourself. It doesn't help you grow in and of itself. It simply describes the state that you're in. like saying you're either light or dark, tall or short. That's you. Happiness, even though it's not an emotion, is a condition of openness, of being alive to love and to fear. It opens also the mind. Mind is more alert, more perceptive, more sensitive. It works when a person is happy. Nothing works when a person is sad. Now, there's a commandment to love and fear God. How can you love and fear God? Only when your disposition is one of joy, because then it encourages emotion. So we're not surprised when the Torah says, serve God with joy, because you have to serve God with joy. Joy finds a very ready place in the service of God. Sadness doesn't. What function does sadness have in the service of God? This has been a perplexing problem for many people who genuinely wished to serve God. They knew that sadness is an experience which somehow has to play a part or a role in the service of God. And this is where they got all bogged down and tripped up, trying to use sadness in the service of God. Because in truth, it doesn't belong. It has no place in the service of God. In order to justify and make sense of that, we first have to have the definition that Chassidus gives. Emotions are human qualities that must serve some purpose in the service of God, must play some role, must be an avenue along which we can serve God. Therefore, it would be wrong to say that fear has no role to play in the service of God, because if it didn't, then why would it exist? Sadness, not being an emotion at all, doesn't have a role in the service of God. The fact that it exists is so that it be avoided, that it be rejected. And that's not rejecting a talent or a quality. That's not rejecting a characteristic that God gave us and saying that it doesn't have any purpose. It's not a talent. It's not a blessing or a gift. It's something to be avoided, as when you walk into a dark room, you don't try to utilize the darkness. You simply turn on the light and the darkness is gone. And you don't say, but wait a minute, doesn't darkness have its function? No, you expel the darkness. You don't give it purpose. You dispose of it. You dismiss it. And the same with sadness. Sadness has no place in godliness because sadness is the absence of light. It's darkness. Sadness is not a real thing. It's merely the absence of joy. And even joy is not an emotion. It's only a disposition. Now we have bitterness. Bitterness is different from sadness. Matter of fact, they're opposites. Sadness is dead and the absence of life. Bitterness is intense life, not dead at all. Bitterness is an intensity where the person who is sad doesn't care. The person who is bitter cares so much that they can do little else. The person who is sad feels heavy and immobile. The person who is bitter can't sit still. So bitterness does serve a godly purpose, because every aspect of life must have a godly purpose. Bitterness, since it's not like sadness, because it is alive, it is a life force, therefore it must have its place in the service of God. Where does bitterness fit in? Particularly since we're supposed to serve God with joy. So Chassidus says that if we had failed on our straight path, on our initial attempt, if we fail in our service of God, the power to correct, to undo the damage, to fix what was wrong and get ourselves back on the track, that power is bitterness. Bitterness is the emotional ability to regurgitate what we shouldn't have absorbed. Bitterness burns out, rejects, and expels those mistaken experiences, things that we regret having done. So it basically corrects what had gone wrong. In space travel, once you get set in your course in outer space, you go on in a straight line or a curve, whatever, but you go on indefinitely. If you want to change your course to make a right turn or a left turn, what do? You have to create a resistance. You have to fire another rocket to push you in the direction you want to go. Because in order to accomplish movement, you have to be able to bounce off something. You have to create a resistance off of which you can propel yourself. So if you're off in the wrong direction, if you're on the wrong track, and the momentum keeps you going in that wrong direction, how do you get yourself right? How do you get back on the track? You need a powerful change of motion, a change of direction that comes through bouncing off a resistance, and that power is bitterness. When a person says, for example, I don't know why I do that, I'm really sorry, and then they do it again. I don't know why I do that. I didn't intend to do it. I'm really a good person. And then you do it again. What do you make of yourself? Are you sincere? If you don't mean to do it, then why did you do it again? Well, I don't know. I just keep doing it. I don't mean to. So what exactly is happening? If you don't mean to do it, if you wish you didn't, but you don't stop doing it, then what's missing here? What is that connection, that switch that is not being thrown? If you're sincere and you really don't want to do it and you don't like to do it, then why does it keep happening? To say just that you're out of control, that doesn't explain it at all, because very seldom is a human being really out of control. So when you say, I can't help myself, what do you mean you can't? If you could help yourself, what would you do? Do you know what to try? You really don't know. If you don't know how to try, you don't know what you should be doing, then how do you know that you can't help yourself? What is this ingredient that makes a person say, I'll never do it again, and then doesn't? And yet the other guy says, I'll try, I don't intend to do it, yet he does it again. The difference is that one has strength, willpower, and the other doesn't. But that itself is not yet an answer. What is one doing that the other is not doing? The real difference is that one feels a little bit sad about what he did, and he'll try not to do it again. But sadness never changes direction. When one feels bitter about what they did, they will change. Bitterness makes a difference. When you feel bitter about something, you've already made a change. You've already broken the momentum. When you sit yourself down and you say, this has got to go, you're embittered about it. And what are you going to do instead? You decide that you're going to break the pattern, you're going to break the habit, and whatever you're going to replace it with is really not so crucial as the fact that it has got to go. The reason that one person doesn't change is because they haven't felt that embitterment. They only feel slightly ashamed, they feel a little bit discouraged by what they've done, but that doesn't change anything. So what can a person do to change? You sit yourself down and you say, what kind of animal are you? How could you do that? Let yourself see the full force of the wrongness of what you did until you can't take it anymore, until it makes you uncomfortable, until you become bitter about it. There's nothing in human behavior, no momentum, no pattern, no habit, no twist, and no personality that can withstand bitterness. If you're bitter about something within yourself, that thing that you're bitter about begins to shrink and wither because you can't stand up to bitterness. Despising evil makes evil go away. In fact, it's the only way. You can't shovel it out with a shovel. The only way to get rid of it is by despising it, because if it's unwanted, it leaves, it goes elsewhere. And unwanted means that you're bitter about it. Saying, I'm so sad, doesn't do anything. That doesn't make the fault uncomfortable. It doesn't make the evil feel unwanted, and so it stays, and it happens again. Bitterness, rather than creating stagnation, is the only tool that brings about change, a real change. And on the other hand, bitterness is not an emotion, it's only a disposition. So you have three dispositions. You have a disposition where you want to do nothing, and that's sadness. You have a disposition where you can do anything, and that's joy. And you have a disposition where something has got to change, and that's bitterness. In different words, you have stagnation, sadness, you've got movement, which is joy, and you've got change of direction, which is bitterness. Stagnation cannot serve any godly purpose, and therefore must be avoided. Joy is the normal, everyday godliness with which we live. Your everyday experience should be joy. On occasion, when warranted, when you need a change of direction for the better, then bitterness is brought into action, brought into play. Looking back at Pesach, at the Seder, when we're commanded to eat bitter herbs, why do we eat the bitter herbs? To remind us of the bitterness that our forefathers suffered in Egypt. The Egyptians embittered our lives. But why is it so healthy to bear a grudge? Why should we sit here 3,000 years later and remember how terrible the Egyptians were? They're all gone and dead for 2,000 years. Isn't it time we forgot? Who are we angry at? The people who live in Egypt today are not the descendants of the original Egyptians? So why do we sit here every year and say, eat the bitter herbs and remind yourself of the bitterness that the Egyptians caused our forefathers? It seems almost an unhealthy thing to do, to hate a whole nation of people who haven't existed for 2,000 years. Obviously, we're not thinking about how the Egyptians embittered the lives of our forefathers. We're thinking about how our forefathers finally got bitter about what was going on. And that's why, if our forefathers in Egypt had been sad about it, then we and our children and our children's children would still be slaves to Pharaoh. What got us out of Egypt? Our forefathers finally got bitter. When you're enslaved, then you're in sadness. Your senses are dulled. And you can't imagine how you could possibly break out of that. How do you break out of it? Through sadness. And that's why the Alter Rebbe says, when a person finds himself sad, emotionless, when a person finds himself caught in sadness, either for some unjustified reason or for no reason at all, whenever a person finds himself saddened and not experiencing joy, then you've got to reject that sadness and replace it with joy. And what if the sadness won't budge? What if it lingers and you can't shake it? You don't just sit there and say, I must be happy, I've got to be happy, smile and hope that somehow you're going to suddenly become joyous. The Alter Rebbe says that when sadness has become a problem and it's not easy to reject it, then you have to resort to bitterness. For example, a person says, I'm really sad about what's going on. What's happening in my life saddens me terribly and I'm depressed. I don't like what's going on. I don't enjoy my life. Sometimes the solution is to consider what it is that is making you sad and analyze whether your response is a sufficient response. So let's take a closer look. When you take a closer look at what this thing is that is making you sad, you suddenly realize that to be sad in response to something like this is no reaction at all. What's going on in your life deserves bitterness. It's not a sad thing, it's a horrible thing. It's not too bad, it's unbearable, it's unacceptable. The reaction of sadness is an avoidance. You're hiding behind sadness, and you have to stop hiding. Take a better look at what's going on in your life that you think is causing sadness. What it really should be causing is bitterness. That's what it deserves. It's that bad. And if you can generate some bitterness, then you're alive again. And once you're alive again, you can work on switching the bitterness into joy. In the comparison to fibrillation, the electric shock for the heart, it brings you from death to life. It's not something you want to feel or be subjected to at any other time. It's not a desirable way of life. But if you're to get rid of the deadness, then you use that really intense shocking to get back to life. Once you're back to life, you don't do that again. You breathe normally and your heart beats normally. Bitterness is the extreme measure taken when you can't shake off the deadness of sadness. The third emotion deserves to be mentioned here. There's love and there's fear, and then there's compassion. The ideal service of God is purposeful, intentional, intelligent love. That's a really perfect human being. Our first forefather, our first patriarch, Avraham, was a philosopher, By observation, study, and analysis, he came to recognize the existence of God. And he was the only one at that time. He discovered it by himself. This discovery was followed by an appropriate emotion of love. So the first Jew to discover God discovered him intelligently and served him through love. That was his outstanding characteristic. Yitzchak served God with fear, and he too served God intelligently. He took his service of God a step further. Avraham discovered God. Obviously, he's going to love him. He found God, which means that God is available, close, and that produces love. Yitzchak thought about it some more and realized that even though God creates the world and is close and involved, there is still much more to it than that. God is infinitely removed from this world, even as he is infinitely involved with this world, and that produces fear, a feeling of smallness. When we don't know enough about God, and we can't understand, we can't think in abstract terms, and because we can't relate to what we can't see, the emotion begins to suffer. The emotions are not intelligently motivated. We still have a natural love for God, because after all, we're Jews. We have a natural fear of God, because we're Jews, but that's second best. What if we don't have even that? What if it's been 3,000 years since God spoke to us at Mount Sinai? That's a very long time. Even the natural or effortless love for God is not consistently available. So with what do we serve God? How do we serve God if we can't drum up love or fear of God? And the answer is with the third emotion, with compassion. What's left after love and fear are gone is compassion. You don't have to love a person to feel compassion towards him. You don't have to fear or respect a person to feel compassion for them. This third emotion, although it is third in the hierarchy of emotions, has the distinct advantage of being everywhere at all times. Love is an extreme, and fear is an extreme. Sometimes you can't reach those extremes, but compassion is right in the middle. You're never without compassion. Love may not be within reach. Fear may not be within reach, but compassion is always within reach. There are times we serve God with love, and there are times we can't love him. Not for any particular reason, simply because we don't know him well enough. There are times we fear God, and there are times we don't, simply because we don't sense his presence as clearly enough or sharply enough to produce the feeling of fear. But we always feel compassion for God. Even people who claim not to believe at all, don't even believe in a creator, they feel genuinely hurt and disturbed when they feel that the world is being destroyed. What's the emotion behind that? They feel upset if the forests are being destroyed and paved over. Why are you upset if wildlife is becoming extinct? Why are you upset if children are being abused? Why? Compassion. But what kind of compassion is this? Compassion for trees? We don't know who created the world, but whoever it was, we feel bad for him. He went to all the trouble to create the world, and look what's happening to his creation. Even if I can't say that I love God or fear him because I don't know enough about him, but wherever he is, and whatever he is, his creation is being destroyed, and that feels bad. That's compassion. Knowing that God created the world, knowing that he is a part of us and we are a part of him, when you see a Jew acting in an ungodly way, what do you feel? Anger at the person? Maybe. But you feel bad for God. You feel compassion for God. Any healthy human being is capable of feeling compassion. And once you feel compassion for someone, you can no longer hate him. Compassion brings the love. If we're angry at somebody and find it impossible to love him, what are the steps? How do you get back to the feeling of love? The answer is compassion. Feel bad. You know the person did a terrible thing. You're angry with him. Then you think how sad it is that a person would do a terrible thing. What could possibly be making the person do these things? You begin to feel compassion, and that compassion brings you back to the love. On the reverse side, those people who should be despised, in other words, if there is someone who you morally have to avoid and must reject because of their evil influence, to say, I agree I disagree with what he does and I condemn his actions, but I feel bad for him, this is wrong. Because if you feel bad for him, then you're already accepting him. That's already going to bring back the love, and you're not ready to do that. The person may not be ready to receive it either. So this compassion may be inappropriate. And that's why the Torah says that when a person worships idols or influences others to worship idols, or if the Jew informs on other Jews to an anti-Semitic government, that person should be punished where there is a Jewish court. And the Torah says you may not have compassion. If you do have compassion, then you won't punish him. Compassion takes away the hate and replaces it with love. When you love somebody, you find it very hard to punish them. And here the person must be punished. Therefore, you must withhold compassion until after the punishment has been administered. Now, in serving God with the heart, we know of 3 basic emotions and 3 basic dispositions. Love is the emotion that should ordinarily, naturally be, the everyday feeling, the everyday experience in life and in service of God is love. The opposite to that is sadness. Sadness has no virtue because it just goes on as it is, unchanging. It's stagnation. The second emotion is fear. The opposite, that is joy, because it's intense, it's alive. So fear and joy have something in common because they're both intense, alive. The third emotion is compassion. Opposite compassion is bitterness, because both bitterness and compassion are changes of direction. Bitterness changes your direction and breaks you out of sadness. Compassion breaks you out of hate and changes your direction back to love. If the person did something bad, the natural inclination is to punish. Compassion comes along and says, well, the person does deserve to be punished, but let's give him another chance. There's a story in times of the Baal Shem Tov, a very simple Jew who came to the study hall and didn't understand what was being said and what was going on. But he did hear the teacher say in the name of the Baal Shem Tov that God wants the heart. Rachmano liba boi, which meant that intellect may be the unique talent of a human being, but the virtue of the human being are his emotions guided by intelligence. God wants not intellect, God wants emotion. God wants the heart. Now, this simple man didn't understand the meaning of the statement. He took it literally. God wants the heart. So he came and he told his wife what he had learned, that there was this great tzaddik and mystic, the Baal Shem Tov, and he said that God wants the heart. So they discussed this, and they came to the conclusion that if such a great tzaddik says that God wants the heart, then they must do something about that. So every Friday, when they prepared chicken for Shabbos, they would take out the heart, they roasted it, spiced it, prepared it as best they knew how, and brought it to the shul and put it into the ark. They were worried, they were concerned that their intentions might not be perfect. It's only a chicken's heart, a poor man's offering, and so they weren't sure that God would accept it. It just happened that there was another man in the shtetl who was very poor and could not feed his family. And as hard as he tried, there was just no way that he could get up enough money to buy some food. And so this one week that was particularly bad, he came running into the shul because he had no place else to go. And he just sat there crying his heart out. His children are hungry. His wife is angry with him. What's he going to do? So he throws himself at God's mercy, saying, I can't do anything more. It's up to you now. And suddenly he realized that something smells really good. And he follows the smell and to the ark, and there he finds a very well-prepared, well-done heart. And he figured that God answered his prayers. And so he took the meat home to feed his family. In the meantime, the couple who had put the meat there came back to shul for mincha, and they saw that the heart was gone. And they were thrilled because that meant that God had accepted the heart. And this went on for a number of weeks, and everybody was happy. When the story got out, people realized what was happening, and Hasidim explained that the two of them, both of them, were not making a mistake. At first glance, it might look like both were being foolish. God was not answering either of their prayers. He wasn't accepting the heart nor was he fabricating meat for the poor guy who couldn't make a living. So they were both being superstitious or naive or silly. But that's not true. They were both right. More right than they thought. The silliness was in the couple's thinking that God had accepted the heart for himself. They thought God had taken it for himself, but he did take it. He took it for one of his children who was impoverished, whom God is obligated to feed. That's who he took it for. And the poor man thought that God was providing meat by making it out of nothing, by having it appear in the ark. But that's not necessarily the only way that God provides. God provides by teaching people to be good to each other. So when we teach people to give the heart, they will be good to each other. And then you don't need a miracle. Sometimes God provides through goodness. God provides by teaching people to be good to each other. And when we teach people to give the heart, that's also a miracle. And the point of the story is that God wants the heart. If we're not capable of the first emotion of love or the second emotion of fear, yet we can still serve God with the heart because we are capable of the third emotion, which is compassion. To have compassion for ourselves, for our own innate decency, to do everything to protect that decency, to protect that which is sacred in our lives, our family, our children, our parents. These things are sacred. Even if we don't have sanctity, we don't love it because we're not holy, or we don't fear it because we're so callous that we think we can do without it, even then we can still have compassion. Rahmanis, to simply have pity on ourselves, not self-pity, but compassion for ourselves, for the sanctity of our lives, for the goodness of our lives, for the things that are sacred to the Jew. Compassion eventually removes the callousness, removes the hatred, and brings back the love. So when a person wants to warm up to his Yiddishkeit, the first emotion should be that of compassion. The Jewish soul that is sent down into this world to make something holy, to make the world holier, this soul is really out of place. It is away from home. It is the princess who has been sent to live with the peasant on his farm, and misses being home, feels displaced. And when the soul of the Jew is not fed and not nourished with mitzvahs and with godliness, then the soul feels totally trapped in a place that it doesn't want to be. It knows that it has a mission, but it doesn't seem to be able to accomplish that mission. And so it doesn't belong. It is imprisoned within us. And to think that a godly soul, a sensitive, living, holy neshama is imprisoned and embittered by its exile in the body, this should bring out a compassion within us, arouse a compassion for godliness, for the neshama, a compassion for God's purpose. God made himself vulnerable to our goodness, to our freedom of choice. And the fact that we've made the wrong choices, or the fact that we haven't been making choices, but simply going along with the tide, living without thought of purpose and without thought of mission or of carrying out God's purpose, that should arouse for us a compassion for that part of God that he embodies within us, the part of God that has become vulnerable to us and has been hurt by our callousness or carelessness. And this compassion is Yaakov's way of serving God. Avram served God with love, Yitzchak served God with joy, but Yaakov served God with compassion. And that's why all Jews are called the children of Israel, which was Yaakov's name, because more than the other patriarchs, we serve God the way Yaakov served God, through compassion, because compassion removes the callousness, overcomes the distance that prevents us from loving God or fearing God, and then by removing that callousness, it opens the path and makes it possible for us to once again actually love godliness.